Well, hello everybody. Welcome to me, your host, Christian Watson. My friends, oh my good friends, and some of my enemies too, who I'm sure are watching this. I've been getting quite an uptick in those recently, which is great, because I'm making an impact. Ever since the leaked draft of Roe v. Wade, the unofficial decision, which we now have confirmation will most likely be the decision the court makes in the end sometime this summer, ever since that was released, there has been a crescendo of fury and unmitigated passions coming from the activist class, the various sectors, I might say, in the interest of individualizing people and staying true to each person's individualism and not collectivizing people, which is precisely what the activist class is doing right now. I'll get to that in a second. In the interest of doing that, I will adjust my language accordingly. The activist class and the sectors of the activist class have been just foaming at the mouth and doing everything they can to intimidate, deconstruct, and destroy some of America's most important social and indeed political institutions. In a video later this week, I will discuss the importance of defending the Supreme Court. So I may not focus too much on the Supreme Court right now, but I will indeed focus upon the other instances of institutional attack which is going on. And my friends, when I say America's institutions, here's what I mean. I don't simply mean buildings or structures that happen to have been important historically, and therefore we should think they're important right now. What I mean the very entities which allow and coordinate social life in this country and in all of its different facets to happen smoothly, to happen with cohesion, to happen and give people tools to reach fulfillment while acting within social life. So necessarily, since there is no one social life, since life in general is a very complex and diverse phenomenon, something that the collectivist traditionalists don't get, we have to understand that there's going to be different institutions that serve different kinds of people in different ways of life. But among those institutions that are fundamentally important in this country is the institution of the church. And of course, there is a pro-abortion group called Ruth Sent Us who infamously said, and I'll put the tweet up on the screen right here, infamously said that it is time to go ahead and confront Catholics, go to Catholic churches and confront Catholics to correct the wrongs of the Catholic, the quote-unquote Catholic extremist over at the Supreme Court. I'll read the tweet right now. Ruth Sent Us said this: whether you're a Catholic for choice, which is a Catholic that believes in abortion, which is an oxymoron, ex-Catholic, or of other or no faith, recognize that 6 extremist Catholics set out to overturn Roe stand at or in a local Catholic church Sunday, May 8th. That was Mother's Day. Now, I was not paying attention to the news on Mother's Day because I was, like most people who have familial connections, with my family on Mother's Day. But when I got back to this desk here and I began looking into the news, I saw a bunch of things that were absolutely disgusting. I saw in California, in Los Angeles, a diocese over there, a church over there, being protested during a service by several people wearing Handmaid's Tale costumes in the church. Now, thankfully, parishioners actually chased out those people from the church. They chased them out peacefully without incident. This happened in the Cathedral of Our Lady of Angels in Los Angeles, most unfortunately. Not only that, but a Catholic church in New York City was also protested. Now, that church tends to be protested quite a lot by quite a lot of people routinely, but the protests are obviously accentuated and elevated given the current political climate we live in. Not only that, but there were Catholic churches in Washington, D.C. who had to ask for security ahead of Mother's Day, on a day when one is supposed to be celebrating a universal sentiment, which is that of love, tied to a person, a vessel by which all of us enter the world, which is our mothers. The churches were instead having to worry about the physical, temporal struggles of life. How can you give someone spiritual guidance if you're constantly under attack by the world? This has been the church's objective, well, regardless of what church it is, for many decades. This was even Christ's objective, to give people guidance and to show an example of what can be if one aspires to something higher. This idea is exemplified in many stories in the Bible, whether the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman, regardless of who it is. Christ always represented that, and the church is meant to carry that out. Regardless if you're a Christian or not, this is just what it is theologically. Not only that, but you had a Catholic church in Boulder get vandalized 2 times from what I can see. And you've also had several pro-life organizations like Wisconsin Family Action have a Molotov cocktail thrown at them. And then you had a Oregon-based abortion anti-abortion group called Oregon Right to Life get a Molotov cocktail or an incendiary device thrown at them as well. Thankfully, no one was hurt in either incident. But all of this is simply an example of action and reaction. Now, we've also had, in the more refined, I suppose you could say, responses, we've had Elizabeth Warren fuming at the mouth, angry, and I covered that in the last week's edition of Pencil Politics. I encourage you guys to check it out. Fuming at the mouth, absolutely gutturally angry over what happened, basically saying that women were being under attack. Then we had Lori Lightfoot and Joe Biden both sharing the same sentiment, basically saying that the Supreme Court is now coming after homosexuals because apparently the Supreme Court, not affirming stare decisis, is now going to go ahead and destroy Burgerfeld v. Hodges, which is the Supreme Court case law which upholds the right of homosexuals to get married. My friends, we are in such a state right now, and I have no idea where to begin. But I do know one thing. The form and tenor of these protests, you hear me closely and you hear me clearly, everybody, because I'm being dead serious right now. The form and tenor of these protests, that means how they manifest and the tone they're taking, are absolutely life-threatening to this republic. This is a republic constituted upon certain principles that are inviolable, and the moment those principles are attacked, things fall apart. Structures collapse. And perhaps that's part of the point. Perhaps some of these people want structures to collapse. Perhaps some of these protesters see America as an impressive country and see it as trying to convert women into that which was the Handmaid's Tales. I will get to that in a moment. But I'm not necessarily even worried about the topic of abortion right now, although that'll be a topic for later discussion. I'm worried about how these groups are protesting, how they're formulating their sentiments, and what that means for our country. The conversation right now, my friends, is built upon several fallacies, and these fallacies are exemplified within these statements of public figures. And the question becomes, if the opposition's beliefs are predicated upon fallacies and mistruths, then how much of their arguments can be taken seriously? To exemplify and show exactly what I mean, I'm going to launch a new segment on this channel called the whiteboard segment, where every other video I will go before a whiteboard and I will actually illustrate what I mean. And I will do that right now. Let's go over the whiteboard so we can see exactly what's happening. And so to illustrate what's going on here as it relates to Roe v. Wade and the response to it, I'm going to demonstrate a few things here on this board because I believe that visually seeing it can actually help understand it a little bit better. So, okay. When Ruth Sent Us says that we're going to go ahead and protest Catholic churches because the 6 justices on the Supreme Court that are leading this repeal of Roe, I'm paraphrasing obviously, are indeed Catholic, something is happening here, and I want you guys to be very close. I've mentioned this concept before on this channel, but I want you guys to understand it very well, because this is going to be one concept that you have to know in order to effectively retort this stuff. As I mentioned before, if we don't understand the foundational roots of an argument or even of a building, we cannot appreciate that argument or that building or understand it for what it is. So when they say that, okay, 6 justices, okay, let's. There's not even 6 people. I can't fit that many on this board, but these are 4 people, okay? We got these 4 people here. Now, these people, let's say they're the justices, okay? I'll put J for justice. Okay, now, these people are close to something that Ruth Sent Us thinks is particularly abhorrent. Look at that very closely. These 4 people, or 6 people, if you want to look at what they understand, are close to the idea of the church. And so, in order to reach these people, which are the justices, one must then go ahead and contest the church. Not because as we see here in this illustration, these four people are all individuals, they are all distinct and separate, and the church is an entity. Now, if we were to translate this into common language, the church itself does not belong to any one individual. The church belongs to a particular statement of values. However, Ruth Sent Us has made the conflation between the institution and the individual, and by proximity, the Catholic Church is now guilty of holding a position or being responsible for the actions that people who happen to be aligned with it take. Obviously, this is a bad argument, because guess what? Just because I am close to something does not mean I am a part of that something. Everything exists. Institutions exist as physically distinct units in reality. That means that this marker right here exists on its own. It does not require this marker to exist. It requires only itself or whatever, its creator who created it to exist. The church does not exist on the basis of what these people do, but it rather exists on its own foundation. But Ruth Sent Us confuses foundations and therefore tries to shift culpability towards an institution that has nothing to do with what these people did. That is proximity ethics, which is essentially making an ethical assertion on the basis not of the content of that assertion per se, but on the basis of the appearance of that assertion, and then drawing emphasis from that. So here's another way I like to illustrate it. All right, and so here's another way to demonstrate proximity ethics. So right here we have a illustration of someone with gasoline on their hand, and this represents fire here. It's a little bit of a poor illustration here. This is a house. The house is burning down. Now this is P1. It says P1 right here, person 1. And so this is the other person. And so this person, I'll call them person 2. And so P2 here simply has gasoline in their hands, and they're standing adjacent to the fire. And person 1 comes along and says, hey, you have a gasoline thing in your hand, and this fire is starting. Therefore, since you have gasoline, you must be the person to start the fire. Since person 2 is close to the fire, close to the house on fire, they are automatically assumed to be responsible for that tragedy. But here's what P1 didn't consider. Let's assume, we're going to say this stands in for a car here, okay? This is a car. A poorly drawn car, but a car nonetheless. And so this car was right here, and cars require gasoline to run. So what if P2 here was simply filling up his car with this gasoline, and the fire happened to happen sometime during that period, and he happened to be close to it? The point is, proximity ethics looks at this only, looks at this one thing right here only, but completely and utterly ignores every other factor that may have to do with someone's actions and judges them accordingly. If you judge someone like this, you cannot arrive at an ethical decision, because this form of judgment is itself incoherent and also unethical. And that's what's happening to the justices. The Catholic Church is being held account, not for its own views on abortion, which they do have pro-life views on abortion, but because the justices of the Supreme Court happen to be Catholic, and therefore that is enough to indict the Catholic Church in the mind of these radical pro-abortion activist class people. And that is not a line I think that any coherent person can or should embrace. And so now we arrive at one of the more common arguments as well used used to justify these protests, which is that they're coming for gays next. The Supreme Court is coming for gays next. In fact, I was actually told this quite recently, that the Supreme Court was coming for homosexuals next, and that gay marriage will be gotten rid of. This is the sentiment of Lori Lightfoot, of Joe Biden, and so on and so forth. So arguments, my friends, are just a series of statements that try to make a point. And premises are the parts of those statements. And the conclusion is the result of the argument. So in an argument, we'll typically say we have premise 1, premise 2, then C, conclusion. Now, an argument can have as many premises as it wants to have according to the laws of logic, but it can only have one conclusion. An argument cannot have more than one conclusion in terms of its logical formulation. So this argument goes something like this. This argument says something like this. It says that abortion was overturned in defiance of precedent. Or rather, let's go this a different way. The Supreme Court is not obeying precedent. Abortion was overturned in defiance of precedent. Therefore, every other thing that the Supreme Court, every other precedent from the Supreme Court is under threat of being overturned. Okay, that is the argument. Premise one is the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade in defiance of precedent. Premise two is that other precedents are at risk of being threatened because of that. And the conclusion is that other precedents like gay marriage may indeed be overturned. So on its face, this does seem like a logical argument, but a argument can be logically sound, which means that its premises cohere with this conclusion. You mean, for example, the moon is made of blue cheese. I'm a moon rock, therefore I'm made of blue cheese. That is a logically coherent argument. But what is not coherent, however, or what is not evaluated with that syllogism is if the argument is factual. Is it factual that the overturn of one precedent necessarily means the overturn of every single other precedent? No, it doesn't. That is a logical fallacy. This is a fault in the argument. This will represent a fault here. This is a fault in the argument's structure. And so essentially what this is a slippery slope fallacy. Now, many people like to use this fallacy to explain certain things, and they say, well, it's not a fallacy. It is a fallacy. So what slippery slope says is that it tries to connect one event with another without establishing causality. All that means is that without establishing that one event directly leads to another. This is like saying, well, they legalized gay marriage, now cats and dogs will get married. Well, you haven't established causality there. So slippery slope is dangerous for a few reasons. Number one, it does not establish causality, and substitute for causality and proof, it actually substitutes the prejudice for causality. So that means not only is slippery slope a rejection of the process of establishing connections, establishing causality, it's also a rejection of the objective by supplementing that for how you personally feel, your subjective feelings. So what we're seeing here by pro-abortion activists is nothing more than the slippery slope argument rehashed into a different form. It was fallacious when other people did it against gay marriage, and it's fallacious now. So the final thing that the pro-abortion crowd is doing is that they're dressing up in these Handmaid's Tale outfits, and they're basically saying that the Supreme Court case threatens their ability to be autonomous over their body. Now, I don't quite have an illustration for this, but perhaps me being up here can provide a more, personable answer to this. But here's the problem with this line of reasoning. Number one, the Supreme Court simply ruled on a matter of law, not necessarily on a matter of personal choice. The Supreme Court simply said in this ruling that the Constitution has no provision for abortion. It is not a right bequeathed by the Constitution. That is simply a legal fact. Now, as I mentioned, proximity. You can have a legal fact that is close to a bunch of other outcomes that one may not be in favor of, but that legal fact, but those outcomes do not negate the prowess and the correctness of that legal fact. But for pro-abortion activists who want to make it seem as if women is being enslaved, when in all reality, there's actually a massive cultural crescendo in favor of abortion coming from some minority religious groups, coming from some corporations which are now going to be offering people stipends to go get abortions, coming from Eric Adams, the mayor of New York City, who is in support of abortion, coming from Lori Lightfoot, coming from the governor of Connecticut, coming from the governor of Pennsylvania, coming from Gavin Newsom, coming from several other states which have promised to be abortion sanctuaries. This idea that the state is trying to wholesale hijack women's bodies and control them is absolute nonsense in the face of the physical facts. But that claim is further undermined by the fact that if we consider seriously the viability and life of the fetus, perhaps this is not a matter for a woman to decide at all, or perhaps the destiny of the fetus is not a matter for a woman to decide at all in any other case, because that fetus, that life, has rights. If you consider that. Now, the thing is that pro-abortion activists completely and utterly reject that argument. I'm not here to litigate that argument, but I am here to say this. The idea that people simply want to control you because they want to intervene in a process that is hotly contested and is very morally heated does not follow, because you have not considered, if you believe that, the arguments and the positions of those who stand opposed to you. You can believe that the fetus is not a life at all, has no rights, but you can still acknowledge that there's a set of people that do believe this and have arguments in favor of it and are using those arguments as a means by which to handle this matter. Their argument is not, I want to control you, I want to dominate you. Their argument simply is, this thing has rights and therefore I am obligated to protect it. That is the opposite of trying to dominate someone. It's actually trying to protect someone from the harmful excesses of another, especially when they can't defend themselves. And there is a moral imperative upon government to protect the rights of citizens, born and unborn. My personal belief. But again, a straw man is devised to paint all pro-life advocates as devious theocrats or totalitarians that want to hijack and control women's bodies. That couldn't be further from the truth, especially if you look at our arguments. There are people that want to ban contraception. The governor of Mississippi is talking about that right now. I'm not in favor of that. And the pro-life argument has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with the status and condition of the fetus within the womb. That's it. Now back to the desk. And so how do we tie this together, my friends? Well, as I demonstrated to you at the board, we have a few problems. We have fallacious argumentation coming from the pro-abortion side. Argumentation that absolutely does not stand up under scrutiny, which is using the slippery slope fallacy. We have a dangerous sense of ethics coming from them as well. Proximity ethics based upon what you're close to, not what you've actually done or what you actually believe, which you can actually stand account to. And in order for justice, the principle of justice, which is what many of these people claim to stand for, in order for it to be triggered and for it to have any validity to it, you must be able to stand account for your own actions. But if you're being held account for the actions of those who are near you, not even people you're associated with, but people who are near you, justice dies. Justice is not able to be unfulfilled. Because at that point, we're not holding people to their actions. And not only that, but we have this false conception, first of all, false conception of rights. I didn't cover that part particularly, which basically says that rights are given to you, not preserved. And also, we have this idea that the Supreme Court is mandating a totalitarian theocracy when in all reality, they're simply looking at matters of law. And then, of course, we have the Satanic Temple coming out and saying that it wants to assume that abortion is a right, a ritual rather, and therefore it shouldn't be banned. And the idea that destroying your child is a ritual or destroying a fetus is a ritual, it's just, that entire thing is beyond me. I might do a separate video about that. But in general, we see the common thing that binds all these arguments together is a complete and utter rejection of the foundations of this nation. The foundations of this nation rooted in natural rights, rooted in empirical, observable reality, rooted in natural justice. The idea that I will stand to account for what I've done and that I have to actually protect the rights of other people. Everything there is being fundamentally rejected by people who have an axe to grind against those concepts. So what do we do? My friends, we have to understand this. If these protests keep happening the way they keep happening, the very fabric of our society in America is under attack, because America is constituted upon peaceable cooperation birthed from the natural law. America is not constituted upon aggression or upon hate towards one another. But these abortion activists are exuding those two qualities, and that is quite dangerous. We have to ensure the bedrock of our republic, the moral framework of this republic, is not only defended fervently, but the social institutions in which we all worship or work in, or which some of us worship and work in, are also defended, because if the government goes, that's one story. But if the social institutions, which keep people on a common basis, if they go, this country is going to be in deep, deep trouble. Americans' existence is going to be in deep, deep trouble. It is a prospect that I fear will come true if we don't apply the tools that I and others have given you to intellectually fight back against these people. It is the last hope. And bringing us back to a more pensive politic, a more smarter politic, and a more just politic. Think on it. My friends, I love you guys so much. If you love my content, please support me on PayPal. My PayPal is officialcwatson@gmail.com. Or my Patreon, which is going to be patreon.com/officialcwatson. Or please join my Discord community where you can talk to me personally and my supporters, which is going to be in the comment section down below. Join my locals, christianwatson.locals.com. Please be sure to like this video, subscribe to this channel, and share this video. This message is dynamite. It helps me. Every little bit helps. My friends, I love you guys so much, and please stay pensive. Bye, guys.